Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and welcome to another Forbidden Record. Now, I originally recorded this, and because it was on the heels of me doing Roundabout for the $10 and up patrons, and I knew I was going to be doing this one, and I listened to it while recording it and studied it very much and was like, this sounds amazing. And then I realized I had done it without ContentID, and I had to go and do it over, so I did. So here's the record. You don't get to hear this. You can probably, because the contrast thing is showing, see that this has an emboss on the cover. There's a little highlight on the AC/DC here, and then the name of the album is only viewable because it's slightly embossed. I don't know whether this is the Spinal Tap inspiration, but this album did come out like this. Songs are on the back. This is the lead track. $19.80. It's not a fold-out. It's the old Atlantic label. But we do get just a little hint of visuals. Firstly, we've got credits. As you know, this is a Mutt Lange AC/DC record. It's really interesting because Mutt Lange got free as strain with like Def Leppard and Shania Twain and so on. This band weren't going to let him push them around, so he did not get to do things like, okay, all of the drums were sampled and we slowed down all the samples to make them huger. No, they didn't get to do that with this. This one was recorded at Compass Point, so it's mixed on a big old MCI console. And they had expectations about how Mutt was to comport himself and what they would let him do as far as overproduction was concerned. He got a little more free rein on the following album, For Those About to Rock. That one is, 1981, 1982, something like that. And it's even huger in a way that maybe they ended up moving away from him and doing Flick of the Switch, which did not chart in the way that these did, but that's because Mutt Lange is good at doing charting records. But we do get to see the band on the inner sleeve. And we've got Cliff Williams on bass. That's his bass. You don't hear his bass all that much, but all the same, it has a powerful impact because it merges with the bass drum completely. Brian Johnson, the new singer, they had just lost Bon Scott. Angus Young in his shorts and his SG for lead guitar. I got some notes for you on how that's done as well. Phil Rudd, note little details like the way that the kick drum, he's playing sonar drums, he's got a front head on there. It does have a hole in it. It's not a very large hole in it, and I think that matters. And then Malcolm with his Gretsch. Now, guitar sounds. This is known to be an amazing album for guitar sounds. And seeing as we don't actually get to listen to it, but you will hear little snippets of it, I'm going to dump as much information as I possibly can on how this was actually done, because there's a lot to it. Well, let me try to put this record back. Oh, I know. There we go. So AC/DC was humbuckers into Marshalls. Note, however, Angus is the guy playing an SG, but Malcolm is not. He's playing a Gretsch into a Marshall, and that was the sound that he used. And the guitars themselves are not as loud as you would expect on this record. You think it's going to be very loud guitars. but you'll be able to plainly see and hear in little tiny brief snippets that the guitars aren't as loud as you'd think they would be. And that's because the impact of the drums has to be able to come forth. The impact of the drums is a really important thing for this type of music. And there also has to be room for the bass just to make everything beefier. So they've got that going on. Gretches don't have as many windings in their pickups as Gibson humbucker. So the impact of the rhythm guitars, it's a little wirier. It's got a little more like edge, more claws to it going on. And there's another relevant detail, and this I know was in play on this album. I don't know whether it was in play on all of the guitar sounds, but it certainly was in play on Angus's solos. AC/DC was using wireless at this time. Like, I'm not sure if... I feel like Malcolm Young might have ended up using wireless, but I don't know if it's in play here. But Angus was using a particular kind of wireless transceiver that did compression on the signal before turning it into FM and broadcasting it to the receiver. That's so that he could run all over the stage, jump around, do all that kind of stuff. They put on an amazing show. The transceiver, the receiver, did not necessarily expand the sound out as much as the compressor compressed it. This wireless system was also a compressor. Now, I don't know all that much about like exactly how much did it compress, how did it work, but the important thing to know about that is AC/DC's sounds into those Marshall amplifiers are not necessarily as loud or as distorted as you would think, because the way they got those sounds was they beat the hell out of the guitars. They didn't necessarily break lots of strings, but they moved very abruptly with like making those sounds jump out. It wasn't necessarily about digging into the strings super hard, but you definitely they had to make the strings bark in order to make the sound bark. And the sound is not being made by just gentle strums. The sound's being made by mid-high gain amplifiers that are Marshall stacks, so they're loud. And in Angus's case, particularly with regard to the solos, this compression that's part of that wireless system. And they didn't run other effects. They didn't do anything. They kept it really, really stripped down and simple. But that one detail means that they could have a mid-heavy sound. Again, it doesn't distort as much as you might think. It's being done by the attack on the strings. The strings are barking. You're hearing that bark come through a not wildly distorted Marshall amp, which is, however, huge and loud. And that's how they do it. And it's fair to go, well, but who cares? This is from the dawn of time. This is like the 1980, and who even cares what anybody does like that anymore? And, well, this was also a band that played their stuff live in the studio. If you're interested in how people grapple with, like, the onset of AI into everything, you could look to bands that played live and made music, because there is a breathingness to that. There is a time and an attitude and an energy to it that can't easily be synthesized or conveyed, or even very well programmed with MIDI or whatever. You do get something special out of that. There's a book on them that I read and enjoyed, and one of the things that happened when they brought on the bass player who was there for this album, I think he was there for earlier than that too, and Phil Red, the drummer, basically pulled the bass player aside and said, "You just get close and you listen to me, and we're going to put the bass notes and the kick drum together so tight nobody's going to be able to get between us." And that's an interesting attitude. And he actually used an F-bomb in there as well, which I omitted, but that's how you do it. That's how you do like high-impact rock music, or indeed high-impact any sort of music. that you're doing by actually playing it. Is you pay attention, you come up with the grooves, you make it work, and then you put it across in a way which maybe the Guitar Wireless system has a compressor in it. I'm not sure whether it was Muttlange being like, yeah, totally use that, or Angus being like, I'm plugging into the amp, but it doesn't quite have the thing that I have live. And then Mutt being like, well, plug into your wireless, do that. And then they did. But bottom line is this is a pretty special record in a bunch of ways. And part of it is because it was make or break time, because they had lost their lead singer. Bon Scott got drunk one too many times and like froze in a car and died. And they had to move on, because it's not like they were going to fail to move on. They started out without Bon Scott, but then he led them to these great, very attitudinous rock band heights that they had reached. And then all of a sudden they were about to hit the big time. And the lead singer dies. And so they have to go and find Brian Johnson. And you'll also hear little snippets of him in the heavily edited down ContentID version of this. But that's the only way that I can play this original 1980 vinyl record so you can hear what this actually was meant to sound like and see, and you get to see all of it, what it would measure like on Airwindows Meter. Where are the peaks? What is the brightness like? What kind of brightness do they get? And it's going to be fairly similar to the Yes track that I did for the $10 patrons, where it is this complete sea of optimal brightness peaks at all times, like at all times. The Yes track that I did roundabout was, if you look at the lowest meter, where it's a black background and it's going to be showing like green dots for optimal tone quality. The Yes one was a sea of green dots with the occasional white speckles, which means that had some extreme high frequency stuff bursting through. This, not so much. This one, it's a sea of green dots with occasional slightly cyan speckles, because it's that thoroughly controlled by Muttlange. And the thing to notice in the metering of this one, for if you wanted to get this actual sound and get it right, check out how much peak headroom is there. The peaks are way hotter than the bed of the regular music, the distorted guitars and the bass and all that kind of stuff. It's a decent, solid place for the body of the music to be, but then the spikes of the drums and the spikes of everything combining together always spike way higher than all of that in a very consistent way. This is also one where, if you look at the top meter, the original Airwindows meter, the one where it's drawn in a white background, so deep blue is the color of the most optimal balance between peak and high frequency. This is one that throws enormous blue dots all over everything, because that first meter, the one that like also tries to set a letter score for everything, that one, rather than just give you a sort of tone color representation, really worked on trying to dial in exactly what the ultimate balance of peak and brightness could be. And it draws these blue dots if it's perfect. But then if it is ultimately perfect, it makes the dot slightly bigger. And yeah, Muttlange, man, it is loaded with optimal sounding peaks all over it. And then there's another like 3 dB or so between the most of the rest of the peaks and the one hottest peak on the track. And that's how they did it. So yeah, I wish I could play this song for you straight through. I really wish I could, because it's a delightful experience. You probably wouldn't even have to enjoy AC/DC to enjoy what they were doing there, because it's that cool of a sound. Everything about it is just magic and perfect. But I could play little snippets of it and you're about to hear that. So if you can stand it, check this out. AC/DC, Forbidden Music, Back in Black.